We will start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Please remain standing because following the Pledge of Allegiance will be a silent moment of reflection. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Liberty and justice.
Thank you. And we'll have the reading of the notice, please.
An educational meeting of the Marathon County Board of Supervisors will be held at the Marathon County Courthouse, Assembly Room, 500 Forest Street in the city of Wausau at 7 p.m. on Thursday, May 20th, 2021, and the agenda was duly signed and posted.
I would like to request all participants here in the meeting to put any electronic devices and/or cell phones on silent or vibrate as to not interrupt the meeting. And we will proceed to roll call. I would ask the clerk to call the roll.
Beestrom. Izzoto.
Present.
Boots. Budke.
Here.
Seiler.
Here.
Conway.
Here.
Dickinson. Here. Drebeck. Here. Pfeifrick.
Here.
Fisher.
Here.
Gaber.
Here.
Gibbs.
Here.
Gonering.
Here.
Guild.
Here.
Gums.
Here.
Harris. Jacobson. Johnson. Krause.
Here.
Lamont.
Present.
Leahy.
Here.
Lowe.
Here.
Mask.
Here.
McEwen. Oberbeck.
Here.
Opal.
Here.
Robinson.
Here.
Rosenberg. Schley.
Here.
Seefeldt.
Here.
Soybert.
Here.
Stark.
Here.
Van Cray.
Here.
Vol. Zhang. Beestrom. Jacobson. Zhang. Thank you.
Thank you. And I would like to welcome all of the guests that we have here with us this evening. And I would also like to welcome all of the viewing audience that we have with us this evening. And we will then proceed on to agenda item number 6, and that is public comment. And we've had, in this case, we've had 5 people sign up for public comment to address the board. They will be granted each 3 minutes to address the board. And we will start out and ask that you announce your name and your address, and then you will be given 3 minutes to address the board. And first we have Abigail Schultz. Abigail, if you would please.
Hello? There you go. My name's Abigail Scholes. I'm at 224491 Sattler Lane, Ringgold, Wisconsin, 54471. Okay. Okay, thank you. So originally, my public comment was going to be on the community for all because I thought that there might be a vote on it tonight, but I didn't want to give up my spot because I wanted a chance to thank you all for what you guys have been doing. So I just want to thank the supervisors for listening and being available to talk. Thank you guys for your comments, especially. I've been able to listen in because we've been putting these on YouTube. That's been super valuable, especially with my work schedule. So I really thank you for that, and I hope that that continues. I'm also very excited to hear this educational presentation, so very excited for that. So thank you for allowing Kevin to talk. As an alternative to what Katie had to say, I listened to Katie's presentation. So I'm just really excited that we're going to have other options for that and just seeing the diversity in that. So thank you. That's all I have to say.
Well, thank you. Next, we have Ann Stamos.
You need my address, right?
Yes, please.
My name is Ann Stamas. I'm at 611 West Street, Wausau, Wisconsin, 54401. Hello, all. I'm Ann Stamas. I'm originally from Medford, and I've lived in Marathon County for 3 years now. This is my first time making public comment because this board and executive committee has successfully gotten Marathon County into the national news and the New York Times for trying and failing to pass a resolution that, from my reading, states we would like our community to be a welcoming and inclusive community. This is extremely embarrassing for myself and for the county. We know that during the COVID-19 pandemic, instances of anti-Asian violence went up across the country and in our community, including the formal charging of a hate crime because of a physical assault. My friends who are Hmong have expressed to me being scared to take their dogs for walks, to go to the grocery store because of the harassment that they have experienced, and the Hmong community as a whole has experienced. The resolution outlines why it's important for the county to be seen as open, inclusive, and welcoming. By not passing this, you are hurting the community as a whole. We have been exposed to the world as a place that, at best, does not care enough to take a stance against the hate that has been perpetrated against its constituents. For the county to grow and prosper, it needs to change. It needs to be a place that will attract new businesses and talented employees, a place that will breed innovation and inclusion. But it cannot do that if we do not start making these first steps to show that we care about everyone in our community. The numbers on discrimination in the life survey, they're not just numbers. They're our neighbors, they're your constituents, and they're my friends. Each and every one of them deserves to feel safe in their own homes and in the community. If we cannot do the bare minimum of passing this resolution that basically says hate is bad, we are condoning a future of even more violence and hatred. Please reconsider your positions on this. Your silence is hurting this community. Thank you.
Thank you. We have next Joanne Leonard.
Ooh, you have this up pretty high tonight. I'm Joanne Leonard. I live at 923 Maple Hill Road, Wausau, Wisconsin. Thank you to the leadership of this board for giving me the opportunity to again speak before you about the resolution, A Community for All. I understand it's been pulled from next week's agenda, board agenda, and the month, and for a vote to be scrutinized, reworked, lengthened, shortened, but continues to mean the same thing. The article in the New York Times was one of the most liberal publications in the country, brought to light even deeper what this resolution is all about. Having a New York Times photographer and reporter here in Wausau, Wisconsin, was an orchestrated effort to smear our community by the very people that live here, are supported by good-paying jobs, and have been elected to represent us. To say, quote, some of those comments in the story were devastating, unquote, the mayor told one publication, I bristled. That should be so embarrassing that you just don't say it to the media. My side note is that many people don't have experience with a biased media. A lot of people were outraged by this, and they should be, unquote, from the mayor. These comments by our mayor were no surprise. Many knew what the headlines would be, a perfect setup to accomplish what divisiveness is all about. This type of setup is going on around the country. No surprise that it landed here. But I know we are not the hateful community or the county portrayed in the New York Times. I've worked hard many years with wonderful people of all ethnicities, backgrounds, and political persuasions that make our community better. Maybe some of the people interviewed don't use the woke words. The people of Marathon County are hardworking, good people. Many don't spend their time researching and following all this in vocabulary. Those that have a stake in those words put their values on the rest of us and use the shaming technique to make sure we are labeled racist, hateful, even though the majority of people in this county have never shown it to be true by their actions. This is a partial quote from a supervisor in the March 18th, 25th edition of City Pages when asked by reporter Kowalski, quote, why not include something more concrete in your resolutions? Answer, that's coming. That, quote, that's coming. The point is to first lay the groundwork for change by acknowledging the problem and building awareness, and the conversation went on. This leads the way to change, unquote. This process doesn't seem to be the way to change. So what's coming? Taxpayers have spent a year dealing with these resolutions. That is why I will not support this resolution. I urge the county board to ask the Diversity Affairs Commission
Time.
to find actionable interest. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Jack Hogendijk.
Good evening, Jack Hogendijk, Hilltop Road, Wausau, Wisconsin. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I love this community. My wife and son and I moved here in 2013, and we have another son who moved here from Washington State with his family 5 years ago. Actually, they were thinking of relocating to Michigan, and they stopped in Wausau and never left. We love everything about this community. It's friendly, it's diverse, and it's inclusive. Are there a few ignorant jerks who call people names or have prejudices against others? Of course. You will find that in every community. But look at some of the examples of the kind of community Marathon County is. I think the only person in the county to have been elected to 3 different offices at the same time is a Hmong American gentleman. He's a county supervisor, a village council member, and a school board member. Who elected him? He's also the chairman of the Diversity Affairs Commission. I don't think he's ever lost an election. We have another young woman who has been elected to the county board and the school board. She's also a Hmong American. And then there's my good friend, Pastor Yao Yang. He's the pastor of the most ethnically and culturally diverse church in the county. He has told the story himself of coming to America as a refugee from Thailand and living in a 2-bedroom apartment with his folks and 8 siblings. He then tells how his family could not afford Christmas presents, but his Caucasian teacher, as he described her, at Lincoln Elementary invited his entire family over for Christmas. She even had presents for them. Her family took him fishing and camping in the summer. Are these examples of a systemically racist community? I think not, Mr. Chairman. And then comes Reed Epstein of the New York Times to tell the entire world that, quote, the racial divisiveness that President Donald J. Trump stoked during his 4 years in the White House endures in the daily life of towns like Wausau, exacerbated by the deaths of Black Americans at the hands of white police officers, and leading to new battles over whether racism is baked into the local institutions. Bad enough he foments this false narrative about President Trump, But for him to suggest that racial divisiveness endures in Wausau and that black Americans are dying at the hands of white officers, well, I ask you, who is really sowing seeds of discourse and hatred in our community? This gentleman has created a false narrative about Marathon County, and I, for one, think he should issue an apology. Wausau and Marathon County are communities for all. We are not perfect, but we are a strong,
20
vibrant,
seconds.
diverse, welcoming community. And the New York Times should be ashamed of themselves for suggesting anything otherwise. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Next, we have James Yedis.
James Yedis, reside at E232534 Pleasant View Road, Town of Easton. I'm a lifelong resident of Marathon County and a proud fourth-generation dairy farmer. And being a farmer, I am eternally optimistic. I am sure that by now, you and your fellow supervisors have become aware of my opposition and stance on the DAC Commission and the recent resolution that was voted down at the last executive committee meeting, to which I am eternally grateful. Now I believe we can turn the page and embark on an exciting new chapter here in Marathon County. This is where my optimism kicks in. Mr. Chairman, I would first like to thank the County Board and all the hard work that each of you have done to maintain a strong and vibrant community. This despite some proclaiming that they do not feel part of this community or have lost confidence or faith in our community, or for some reason, they do not feel safe here because you happen to be a woman, especially a black woman. Maybe Chicago would be a better fit for these people, where there are hundreds of shootings and more murders and countless other crimes there in 1 month than we will ever experience here in our lifetime. If it's so bad here, then by all means, please go. I also fail to see how an overwhelmingly white populace can be seen as not recognizing diversity and be systemically racist if we duly elect people of color to positions of authority, such as county and school boards, plus many other commissions and committees. It just does not fit the narrative. People want to come here because you and our county board work very hard to make this a safe place to raise a family with good paying jobs and high quality infrastructure and education. You seek to spend our tax dollars wisely and look to do things to help people in legitimate need, while doing your best to protect everyone's fundamental constitutional rights, regardless of their skin color or ethnic background. It is now time to start focusing on the good things this county has to offer and why good, hardworking people should come here. We will never be a technology hub with those extraordinarily high-salaried people, but we sure have a bunch of great businesses here that pay a really good wage if one is willing to work at it, which will provide a very good standard of living. We must focus on promoting our diversity of economic opportunity and the safety of our area which we live. We have businesses here that are not only renowned for their products locally, but also around the state, country, and internationally. And this is all made possible by the great, ingenious, and salt-of-the-earth hardworking people that these businesses employ. Manufacturers such as Greenheck, Wassa Tile, Imperial Industries, Aspiros Hospitals and Clinics, Line Tech, Wassa Coated, Colby & Colby Millwork, Kraft, Merrill Iron and Steel, and my personal favorite, Mullins Cheese. Our trade people that do electrical, plumbing, construction, repairs, and medical personnel are second to none.
20 seconds, please.
As well as our wonderful dining establishments. Our overall education and post-high school education opportunities are fantastic and need to be recognized as well. Oh, let's not leave out our agricultural stuff, from ginseng to cattle to maple syrup to cash cropping to tree farms, and again, my personal favorite, dairy farming. There are so many more that I could mention, but I do not have the time. We have a great community here. Let's build on our positives and show why we are a community for all.
Thank you. That is all we have for public comment, and so we will move on to item number 8, education presentation and/or reports. First, under item 8A, standing committee chairpersons or designees. Okay, we will move on to item 8B. We have with us this evening Kevin McGarry and Neil, and I'm Mammon? I apologize, and they will have a presentation for us. Thank you.
I want to personally thank okay, can you get, oh, here we go. All right. All right. I want to personally thank the board, the entire board. You guys have been very gracious in allowing us the opportunity to come and spend some time with you and participate in this educational forum tonight. I also want to thank the people in Marathon County. We've just been here a few hours, but the reception has been exceptional. We've spent some time talking to people here and in and throughout the county. I was on the radio just recently, and I can say that you guys are the salt of the earth. I mean, this is wonderful. It looks like a community that is united. I know looks are deceiving, but I just want to applaud everybody here for being here. And sorry. Oh boy. Okay. A little bit of logistics here. Let's work that up. So we're just honored to be here. My name is Kevin McGarry, and I and Neil Mauman are the founders of Every Black Life Matters. Can I just, okay, anyway. Every Black Life Matters. And we really travel the country, and we try to help sort through weighty issues right now. We have a lot of issues about race that we're trying to really figure out. We have communities like yours who are thoughtful and mindful and considerate and compassionate, but are going through issues of being sort of overlaid with a certain amount of guilt and accusation. So you're trying to figure out, well, where did all this come from, and what really happened here? And really, over the past several years, we've been sort of accelerating towards times when we have racial animus. There's been a number of things that have really precipitated where we are today. There's been some very intellectual writers and prognosticators about race that have done some magnificent works, and some have done some winsome works. But yet and still, they've taken root in the psyche of a lot of America. And with that, then we get some radical changes. We have, some parts of the country that really want to radically accept parts of these, theories. They want to radically sort of change or transform, if you will, entire communities based on some of these theoretical prognostications. So Neil and I go around, and we're trying to work with communities to really sort out the bottom line. What is the nub of the change that we really need to incorporate to have, as you say, communities for all? One of the things that I think that is the divide here is that you have a lot of people that say we are welcoming, we are loving, we are compassionate, we are sensitive, and we already have a community for all. And then you have people on the other side that says, well, no, this is not a loving, compassionate, and accepting community. We feel threatened. We've heard, some of the testimony today. And therefore, we need to really radically change how we operate as the citizens within this county. There is a fundamental disconnect. And so what I wanted to do, Neil and I, our job to do tonight is to try to help expose any inconsistencies, any areas where perhaps we have agreement, but we just are semantically talking above or beneath one another, so we're never really connecting with what the issues are in the community. So one of the things that one of the really sort of profound, let's say, talking heads, if you will, within the community for transformation is Ibram X. Kendi. And a lot of people are probably aware of his works. Some people probably read his book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. Certainly, we had one of your speakers before that mentioned him and Robin DiAngelo, and they are at the sort of tip of the spear with bringing out transformational change with some of these things. But here's the disconnect for people in Marathon County who think that, we already have a compassionate, loving environment already, is when they read Kendi, who says, the only remedy to past discrimination is present discrimination, and the only remedy to present discrimination is future discrimination. So this creates a bit of a conundrum, a quandary for people who say, look, well, wait a minute. You want us to read Kendi's books and D'Angelo's books. Their books are basically dividing us. How is that going to help us become a community for all? There's a fundamental disconnect. Discrimination is discrimination. I thought we all fight against that. And so some of these people are thinking, this doesn't make sense. Why is there such an incongruence when you are pointing to people that are supposedly transformational and bringing about change that's going to take us forward while using tactics of the past? So some people in the community are saying, look, I remember when Dr. Martin Luther King was the tip of the spear for the civil rights era in the 1960s. And he admonished and encouraged us all that we should judge one another based on the content of our character and not the color of our skin. So they're thinking about that, and they're thinking, so now you have a person that asserts that we must discriminate, and you have a whole cadre of people that are really, trying to enforce these new theories, and they're like, this doesn't make sense. How is that going to encourage us to become a community for all when we're saying up front, no, we want to discriminate. We want to discriminate you against you based upon your skin color. And so people are saying, well, doesn't that take us back? How does that move us forward? So you have a group of people that says, no, we move forward by these tactics of discrimination. And you have a group of people, the salt of the earth, and they're saying, how do we make sense of this? This doesn't make sense. It's going to divide us. It's going to encourage hate. It's going to encourage self-loathing and so many other things. So how do we sort this out? We're obviously at an inflection point, and we have a divide, even in this room. It's clear. So one of the things that we have to begin to look at is there any kind of level set where we can be honest with each other, irrespective of the side you're on? Just be honest with each other about what our true motivations are. We have committees that are equity, diversity, and inclusion. And we have these words that sound, holistic and great, but then a lot of those people are talking about Kendi's work. And so we're like, well, how do you make sense of this? So a lot of people, and a lot of people that I've talked to, are saying, look, we don't mind continuing to redouble our efforts to support Dr. MLK's admonition for us to respect one another based on our skills, talents, abilities, and our content of character. But to get us to completely shift to either accept or dismiss someone strictly based on the color of their skin is a step back. So it seems to them that a lot of people would like to socially preen or virtue signal based upon diversity, inclusion, and equity, but in reality, they're insincere because what they're positioning, what they're trying to promote, divides. So how do we get past this? How do we really sort out what's happening here? Here's what's interesting. If you were to look at the history just a little bit, and just allow that to sort of guide us to fundamentals about what's really right and just, especially for blacks in this regard, then maybe we have a way that we can sort of communicate without dismissing one another. So I'd like to just propose we take a step back historically and take a step back to the early 1900s. There were some people in the early 1900s that were self-admitted white supremacists. They were eugenicists. They believed that there was a perfect Aryan race and they needed to protect that. There was a particular prophetess that came out of that mind, out of that thinking, and her name was Margaret Sanger. And so Margaret Sanger, she hated blacks. She was, she says, look, they're reckless breeders, they're weeds and the scourge of society. And she decided she was going to do something about it. She said, I don't want the word to get out, but I want to fully exterminate the Negro population. So you know what she did? She started her abortuaries around the country and strategically put all of her resources in the black community. 90% of her resources. To this very day, 90% of Planned Parenthood is fully exterminating the Negro population, carrying out her vision. Now, that's just, we could say, well, that's just a story for story's sake. But the reality is, none of her efforts are inclusionary. She was completely rejecting any part of equity for blacks, especially. And diversity was not her goal. She was an Aryan white supremacist. So what's interesting is, however, most of the people, including those who have written books like Kendi and Robin DiAngelo, that says they're going to help us to solve issues of race, fully support Margaret Sanger. So people in this room, we're not fools, we're kind of thoughtful. We're like, well, how do you fully exterminate? You commit black genocide practically. You're all about exterminating the Negro population, and you have these followers who have written these profound works, who are all in with these schemes. Most of the diversity, inclusion, and equity teams that I'm aware of around the country are all in with these schemes, completely in support of Planned Parenthood and every scheme they have to devalue and exterminate the black population to this very day. So we as thoughtful Americans were like, man, if we can at least come together, if you're sincere in your diversity, inclusion, and equity, if you're sincere, can you at least offer a public rebuke? Can you at least do a public denunciation of Planned Parenthood? After all, they did it. Planned Parenthood in New York fully denounced Margaret Sanger, July of 2020, just last year. Said she was a racist bigot. We denounce her. End of story. Why can't DiAngelo, Kendi, some of the other, people who are trying to get transformational change done, why can't they do it? Better yet, why can't the mayor do it? She's all in. They support her, she supports them. Why can't, but yet she says, community for all. But she's all in with fully exterminating people. Blacks. So how do you make sense of this? What are we to do with this? How do we come together when fundamentally we have people that say one thing and do another? This is one of the incongruencies that keeps us kind of from coming together on Community for All, because we're not seeing anything that's consistent. the underlying principles don't align with the policies. So, the other thing that we see is that a lot of our diversity, equity, and inclusion committees are now encouraging that they reduce academic standards because blacks can't compete. Now, I want you guys to understand something. There's millions of black engineers right now around the world doing great work, innovating, engineering, incredible work. There's millions of literary geniuses that happen to be black, already in existence, doing great works. But now we're saying, we're using terms that Margaret Sanger used. We're not saying the word, but we're using the term, blacks are feeble-minded. We need to change the curriculum. No more advanced mathematics, no more advanced English because blacks can't keep up. This is demeaning, and this is racist. And I don't care what color you are, if you're participating in this kind of curriculum change, you are emphatically racist because you're saying that blacks don't have what it takes. A lot of the good people here who believe that the community for all, they've already accepted community for all, they've already accepted Dr. Martin Luther King's admonition. They believe, they believe that we should keep the curriculum as it is. As a matter of fact, we should advance and perhaps give school choice so we can have more blacks participate at a higher level. But it's interesting when you have these people that are driving the initiatives to transform your communities, who say they're diversity and inclusion people, that are pushing to actually demean blacks. This is confusing. I mean, how do you make sense of this? Logically, sensibly, how do we make sense of this? How do we come together as a community? Can we at least agree that, oh man, thank you. Ooh. Can we at least agree, bear with me, that this is an injustice? These are mortuaries, heavily influenced in black communities, and educational standards are injustice. Can we at least agree with that? If we can agree with that, then perhaps we can move the needle on actually creating an environment that's truly inclusive and diverse and provides equity. If we can't agree with that, then we see that there's a lot of people involved in this that are insincere. They're political activists. They're not sincere about helping blacks. I mean, I don't see any other way. It's kind of black and white that way, right? No pun intended. Here's another example. Here's another thing that really kind of, a lot of people here are like, I can't wrap my mind around what they're trying to do, because here's the thing. We are told that when prisoners come out of prison, that we must allow them to be redeemed. We must be able to accept them and unify around them, and I agree, we should. We should allow them the opportunity to demonstrate that they are a redeemed person, that they're a new person, they've done their sentence and they're ready. Here's the other thing that we've been told. When 9/11 happened, we were told, we were demanded, you do not overlay any kind of racist assertion or accusation onto Muslims or people of Middle Eastern descent. And I agree, that was a smart thing to do. We shouldn't have. And that would have been racist for us to do that. And now we're told that, people of Asian descent, we should absolutely not hold anything against them because of this virus that came from China. We shouldn't. It's unfair, it's unjust. And we should not. But here's the thing that really is mind-boggling to people, the salt of the earth, that I'm speaking to right now. But they're saying, look, if you're white, you're irredeemable. We're going to lay everything at your feet, all of the slavery and everything, and there's nothing you can do. Robert DiAngelo says as much. Every white person is a white supremacist racist. Robin DiAngelo. Read her book. And there's nothing you can do about it. How does that jive? Wait a minute. You just said we shouldn't hold everything against all Muslims. We shouldn't hold everything against all Asians. When people come out of prison, we should allow them to be redeemed. How do we now say, no. Every white person, we need to hold them with contempt? Do you understand? So we're wrestling with this. We're like, well, I kind of got you, but this is kind of, I don't know what to do about this. How do you make sense of this? How do you reconcile this within the context of diversity, inclusion, and equity? So thinkers are thinking this through, and they're saying, this doesn't make any sense. Especially when you consider history. Quick walk down memory lane. Early 1800s, we had a particular faction that encouraged, supported, and elongated slavery. That particular faction in the early and mid-1800s put judges in place that when we had critical cases like Dred Scott and Jim Crow and Plessy versus Ferguson, there were progressive judges, and they ruled against it. They elongated slavery. They elongated the suffering of blacks. That particular faction, when Abraham Lincoln was president, he signed off on 40 acres and a mule. But he happened to have a vice president that didn't, he was a different party. That vice president belonged to this faction I'm referring to, and he took that off the table. Then when we had the Homestead Act that was supposed to help during Reconstruction, help slavery, do the research, it's fine. Homestead Act is supposed to help people coming out of slavery, give them some property, some land, some acres. That particular faction made sure that the judges and the legislators that were giving the land would only give it to European immigrant settlers here in America, almost completely rejecting blacks. This is a particular faction that did this. Then that particular faction encouraged segregation after Reconstruction, encouraged eugenics, encouraged Marxism, encouraged the destruction of the nuclear family, encouraged the government dependence by black families and communities, and voted against with overwhelming majorities all civil rights acts. There were multiple. We tried to get this since late 1800s, took us to 1964. The point here for thinkers is that this wasn't all whites. This was a faction of whites. If it were all whites, we wouldn't have had a civil war. Are you following? We had a civil war to set people like me free. If all whites were complicit with racism and slavery, I'd be probably still in some chains somewhere, man. Do you understand what I'm saying? So how then can people like Kendi and DiAngelo and these other folks say all whites are complicit with slavery, you're all racist, supremacist, privileged, and you all deserve, to be dismissed? People in here who are thoughtful, they're thinking this through and they're saying, yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. This doesn't make sense. Since when do we give up on the civil rights, Dr. MLK's, which after he gave us that admonition and encouragement, we began to change laws, labor laws, federal laws, countywide laws, to help ensure that we would have people and protect them and give them equity, give them an opportunity to come to the table. That's what we did, right? And now they're saying, no, that's not good enough. No. All whites, we need to hate them. We need to dismiss them. Here's what I'm going to give because Neil has a lot of things to say. So I'm going to let Neil come up here in a second. But here is what I want to leave you with. Moving forward, how do we get past this? These people who are coming up with these schemes are basically, they're solidifying racism, and they're trying to cement it as a way to move forward. When you hate people, when you dismiss people simply because of immutable characteristics like the color of their skin, it's racism. And these people are saying, yeah, it's okay. Because all whites participated in slavery, which we've all debunked that. They're also basically saying that all whites are born racist, and they're going to put in curriculum that is going to completely divide our communities. Our children are going to grow up hating each other. White children are going to grow up self-loathing. Self-loathing. And for some people, that's good. Hey, they deserve that. Yeah, that's right, that's right. We were self-loathing for a while. Yeah, that's good. This is not how we build communities. This is how we destroy them. I'm going to ask Neil to come up and say a few words. Thank you.
It'll take a few seconds here. Okay, we're good. On August 28, 1955, Emmett Till walked into a store in Mississippi. There were no witnesses in the store, but Carolyn Bryant, the woman behind the counter, claimed that he grabbed her, made lewd advances, and wolf whistled her. A few days later, Carolyn's husband, Roy Bryant, and his half-brother, J.W. Millam, went over to where Emmett was staying and kidnapped him. They tortured him, gouged his eye out, and beat him to death. When his body was found, the authorities could only identify it by his ring. The white jury issued a verdict of not guilty, saying that the state had not identified Emmett's body. They were never prosecuted for the murder or for the kidnapping. In 2017, Carolyn Bryant, who as far as I know is still living, admitted that Till had never done anything similar to what he had claimed. Bryant has not paid for her false witness. She has never paid for her crimes. During slavery and until the Civil Rights Act was passed, there was no retribution against those who would hurt or attack blacks. Thank you for the opportunity to let me speak to you today. Today I want to ask you to join me as friends on a journey of love and a journey of emotions and solutions. Emmett Till is just one example of men violating the rights of another, but the history of America is replete with these atrocities. Now, after the Civil Rights Act, there were still those who would commit racist violence, but when the public found out, justice was served. For example, in 1981, several KKK members beat and killed Michael Donald, a 19-year-old African American. The 4 men involved in that were captured. Henry Hayes was executed in the electric chair for his crime. James Knowles and the 3rd man was sentenced to life in prison. A 4th accomplice died before his trial would have completed, but he probably would have been sentenced. All 4 were effectively prosecuted for their crimes. But atrocities in the past with no justice were not limited to white on black crimes. Elijah Lovejoy was a white abolitionist. He was lynched in 1837. John Stevens was a white state senator, lynched in 1870 by the KKK for being an advocate for the freed slaves. Nobody was charged with murder. Atrocities are not limited to the United States. We know horrendous atrocities were done to the blacks, and it's heartbreaking to see how the hearts of men turn to evil. But surely you agree with me that we are a fallen race. And that means a race of humans. And that can be seen in the atrocities around the world. For instance, the rape of Nanking, where Japanese soldiers raped and brutally killed Chinese civilians. But lest we think the Chinese are innocent, don't forget the Boxer Revolution, which was an attack against all foreigners, including British missionaries who'd spent their entire life taking care of the poor and giving medical aid to those in China. But if you think the British were noble, look at the massacres in India, when British soldiers gunned down unarmed Indians in Punjab, and the 200 years of British occupation of India. But the Indians, surely no. Look at how missionary Graham Staines and his 3 young kids were burned alive in their car while Hindus stood by pushing those kids back in the car. Atrocities are not limited to race. It can include language or culture or religion differences. Look at the massacre of Hindus by Muslims and Muslims by Hindus in India. They're the same race, they're the same ethnicity, they're exactly the same people. In fact, cousin against cousin, differentiated only by religion. It's not a race issue. It's a human heart issue. Any difference is sufficient to divide people who are fallen. We are a fallen race of men whose hearts turn easily to evil. Do I need to speak of the Nazi Holocaust or the original enslavement? Where do we get the word slave from? It comes from the word Slav. Ever meet a Czechoslovakian? Their ancestors were the first known slaves. I mean, there were slaves throughout history, but they were where the name originates. The heart of man naturally tends to evil, and that is clear. No race, no ethnicity gets a buy in this. All men are created, and if we are guilty, and if we pretend it isn't so, then we will never solve the real problem. I want to now switch topics and talk about what social justice movements teach. Most of the social justice movements were born out of the Frankfurt School at Columbia University in the 1930s, which is basically 4 white men who wanted to bring Marxism into America, and by certain Marxist priests in South America. Now, in the interest of full disclosure, I was born at a very early age in Ghana, Africa. I grew up in Africa, spent most of my life, youth in Africa, in Yemen, in Sudan, in Ethiopia, and Jamaica, which is not Africa, obviously. But my parents are from Indian origin, and I am the product of a Marxist upbringing. My father was an atheist and a Marxist until I was about 5. Most of my cousins were Marxist or communists. The argument at home was which version of Marxism or communism should we join? Should we join the Communist Party of India, or should we join the Communist Party Marxists of India? Most of my uncles were Marxists or communists. 2 of my uncles had death sentences against them because they were communists and the Indian government didn't want them around, and so they were on the hunt, dead or alive. Another uncle was a communist activist and later became the leader of the World Council of Churches, a group that teaches liberation theology. Liberation theology is a Marxist originated doctrine, which is at the root of black liberation theology and critical theory. As you can imagine, I'm often the black sheep of the family. And our family reunions get very loud. No, so how did this Frankfurt School intend to bring socialism to America? They wanted to bring socialism to America, but they realized that the American kids, the American youth, the American people had a spirit of independence which would never allow socialism to be adopted normally. They would have to change America. And they realized that there were 5 things they had to do to change America. They were focused to do this by focusing on 5 areas. 1, break down the educational system and teach kids from an early age to be socialists, to be less independent, to become vassals of the state. Look up Horace Mann and John Dewey if you disagree with me. 2, break down the economic system. By the way, Horace Mann and John Dewey, Columbia University, where the Frankfurt School was started. 2, break down the economic system to create dependency on the state. Look up the Clover-Piven strategy, 2 professors out of Columbia University. 3, break down the family structure and make families dependent on the state. change the divorce laws, and the attack of the fatherhood by the state. See all those things. In fact, the states have been incentivized to reduce fatherhood by the Title 4D incentives. For every dollar a father puts or a person puts in child support, the state gets $1 from the US government, incentivizing fatherlessness. 4, break down the churches and stop them from providing charity, so charity can only come from the state. 5, break down the gradual reunification of America by creating racial strife, allowing the state to make more and more control. All these are documented. I've not made up any of this. I've learned a lot of it through my cousins. So to achieve these 5 things, they began to promote the idea of social justice as opposed to moral justice. What do they teach? Well, 1, they teach that there is no objective morality. But the minute you say there is no more objective morality, how can you say Hitler was wrong? They teach there's no objective truth. Truth, they say, is a social construct. They don't say truth does not exist, but only that certain people have access to it. Truth is based on how you experience it, and how you experience it depends on if you're a part of the oppressed class or the oppressor class. By the way, don't tell my 8-year-old that there is no objective truth. She will just raise her hand and say, I'm sorry, is that true? They wish to teach that all of society is split between the oppressor and the oppressor. It's a power dynamic. They wish to teach that the oppressed, by virtue of their being oppressed, are automatically more moral. Morality is determined by that which the oppressed say is moral. They wish to teach that your being morally moral is solely dependent on which class you're from. You see, you're automatically a racist by virtue of being in the class that you are from. In this case, whites. First, not because you act that way, not because you think that way, but just because you look that way. Which, if you think of it, is simply racism, in which a person is judged based on the color of their skin. A black person, by this reckoning, is more moral than a white person. They wish to teach that racism is everywhere, and it's because you're white and thus a racist that you cannot recognize it. And worse, you cannot change. But lest you say I'm putting words in the mouths of those who will prevent these new social movements, let me give you my sources. Robin DiAngelo says, a positive white identity is an impossible goal. In fact, previous speakers have referred you, recommended that you read this book. Well, this is what you'll read. White identity is inherently racist. White people do not exist outside the system of white supremacy. To be less white is to be less racially oppressive. Richard Delgado and Jean Stefanik say many critical race theorists and social scientists hold that racism is pervasive, systemic, and deeply ingrained. If we take this perspective, then no white member of society seems so innocent. Tandeka says that raising a white child to be white is a form of child abuse. I mean, I'm not making this up. This is what I'm reading, and this is what you're recommended to read, supervisors and decision makers. Stephanie Wildman says, some readers may be shocked to see a white person contritely acknowledge that she's a racist. I do not say this with pride. I simply believe that no matter how hard I work at not being a racist, I still am. Because part of the racism is systemic. I benefit from the privilege that I'm struggling to see. All whites are racist in this use of the term, because we benefit from systemic white privilege. But if you look at these statements, they provide no evidence of their arguments. This has no philosophical or logical foundation. The most you can point to is what happened half a century ago or more, and that was bad, but we all agree that was bad. This is just merely declarations, and declarations are not logical arguments. Worse, how do they deal with the fact that over years there have been many white, Asian, and Indian slaves, and all of them have been discriminated against? In fact, in India today, if you go there, there are 350 million untouchables, discriminated on a daily basis by fellow Indians who are no different than them. Okay, back to our list. They wish to teach that if you say that you're blind to color or act like you're blind to race or color, that is, you treat all people equally, this actually perpetuates the power and privileges of the dominant group. I remember a quote. It goes like this. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. These are not my words. They're not the words of Ibram Kendi or Robin DiAngelo. You know well this is the words of what? The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. But if you agree with Ibram Kendi or DiAngelo or any of these social justice theorists or the Frankfurt School, I would have to ask you if you condemn Dr. King for his words. Are you saying he was wrong? Are you saying he was misguided? Or are you worse, saying that he's a white supremacist? If you reject what he specifically said, you reject the very basis for his movement, and you worse, you reject the basis for which he lived, and more importantly, the basis for which he died. You're saying that Martin Luther King died for nothing, that he should have accepted the principle that his racist killer killed him for. You see, his killer believed that color is the dividing line, that color should separate, that color determines morality, that racial divisions should be the norm. Do we reject that? Let's keep going. The social justice promotes that they wish to teach that if a white person helps a black person, it's only because it helps their own self-interest. Now, I want you to understand the logic of this statement. Today, whatever this board decides to do to help black communities, you only did it for your own self-interest. But I know that's not true. You know that's not true. You really care about blacks. You care about minorities. You care about every ethnicity. You care about whites. You care about everyone. I know that's true, but the very fact that if you vote for something that says that you should adopt these things, you are then voting for your own self-interest, which makes you a racist. They wish to teach members of the oppressed groups that have special access to truth because of their lived experience of oppression. Such insight is unavailable to members of oppressor groups who are blinded by their white privilege. So any appeals to objective evidence or reason made by dominant groups are actually bids for continued institutional power. And this leads us back to that there is no objective truth. Remember, if you say there is no objective truth, my daughter will ask you, I'm sorry, is that true? Okay, why are these social justice movements dangerous to true justice? And I want to differentiate social justice from true justice. As I noted, the new social justice movements say that MLK's comment about judging based on the color of a character versus the content of a character versus the color of your skin is wrong. So these movements are opposed to the American civil rights movement. They're opposed to all the black men and white men and pastors and women who died fighting for civil rights. These movements say that there's no objective right or wrong. Evil is relative to your experience. This is inherently dangerous. They claim that the minority gets to decide what is right and wrong. But here's where it gets really interesting. In a few years, Hispanics will be the majority in America, and whites will be the minority. Do the tables turn then? Do Hispanics become evil then? And remember this, whites are only 18% of the world. You're not a majority in the world. So now do you suddenly become the minority, and then your views become the dominant view because you're under the hegemony? These movements divide people instead of uniting them. They say that if you're a white, you're a de facto racist because you're a part of the oppressor class, and you can never change. This is not a recipe for success. This is a recipe for people giving up and saying there's nothing I can do about it. But 99% of white people are not racist. They don't wake up in the morning thinking that they're more superior to anyone. I came here 40 years ago. It took me 12 years to become a US citizen. And I can tell you, and I've traveled the world, as you can see. I traveled the world as a kid, living with my father. I traveled as an engineer around the world. I went to all different continents. And I can tell you, I've lived in Sudan, in Yemen, I've lived with Arabs, I've lived with the Sunnis, I've lived with Indians, I've visited the Chinese. I can tell you, America is the most amazing, welcoming country in the entire world. It is also the most giving country in the entire world. Last year, Americans gave over $410 billion to charity. That's 9 times more than the next closest nation, which is the Germans, and 11 times more than the next closest, which is the Italians. There's no nation that can match America, and that did not come from foundations. That came from individuals mainly. It's dangerous because these movements really see color with a caveat. You know, the phrase love sees no color. Well, CRT says it should, and that's good. It violates the Christian concept that sees no male or female, Jew or Gentile, slave or freeman. They're all equal in God's sight. These movements take good intentions and twist them to make those intentions just a power play. You're only doing it for your own self-interest. So people with good intentions to solve black plight will abandon their work. And they provide no solutions except condemnation. Stella Morabito states, indeed, agitators who deploy this have zero interest in ending racism. Instead, they've made essentially the same point over again. Racism is an unsolvable problem. If you're tainted as white, there's nothing you can do about it. You're eternally a racist, especially if you don't believe you are. Robin DiAngelo explains it all in her best-selling book, White Fragility. Your only option is the cultist option. Submit to your critical race theory overlords, then recruit others to do the same. If, however, you're a black person who disagrees with all this, well, then you ain't black. Condemning people without giving them a way out or by implying that you will replace the unfair hierarchy with a new unfair hierarchy will only result in more violence and racial strife. Remember the 5 Marxist principles that they were after to change America? In history, we have examples of what this happens. When we forced the children to pay for the crimes of their fathers. Do you remember the Versailles Pact with Germany after World War I? The children of the World War I Germans were held responsible by the pact to pay off the World War I retribution. Do you know what happened? It gave rise to the Nazis. They became angry. World War II, we learned that lesson. We had the Nuremberg trials. We held those specific factions responsible, and we forgave the rest. Today, with the actions of BLM and of government to condemn and taint white people, the poor white families, I'm telling you, this is a warning here, the poor white families who have been poor for generations will become the breeding ground for white supremacist groups to recruit. You want a race strife? Continue this, and people who are disadvantaged will be the fertile recruiting ground. And then this is what will happen. My children and Kevin's children and black children and brown children throughout this country will bear the brunt of that anger. You are playing with fire, and you are playing with my kids' lives. And guess who will not suffer? Those people who live in the gated communities with hired guards who have guns. You know, this is actually more chilling when you think of the defund the police movements. What better way to get rid of protectors? What better way to decimate certain minorities than to make sure there are no protectors, there's no thin blue line? Surveys have shown that most black parents want police. They want criminal justice reform. They want police to be accountable for their bad actions, but they want good cops. Now, don't be confused. Racism is indeed evil. Ethnocentricity does indeed exist. The black community in America has indeed been targeted and suppressed, and a solution needs to be found. But my friends, we can't solve any of this by creating reverse racist policies. If we love people, we need to focus on protecting rights and solving the cause of the problems, not equalizing results. If what those who promote this new social justice movement are right, and then whatever anyone else said here who is not white, this is the funny thing about it, whoever spoke here today or previously, if they are right, then what they said is not as right as what Kevin and I just said. Because we're colored. We have moral superiority. The very fact that you agree with them means that you're disagreeing with us. That means you are a racist, right? So you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. This is illogical and philosophically and rationally unsound. You cannot bring true justice without defending true rights. So if you care about true justice, you have to work for true justice and not social justice. Now, let me take a little, I think this is very important that we understand this. What is true justice and what is social justice? Is it justice to discriminate against someone because of the color of their skin? Right? We all agree that's wrong. Is it justice to make sure everybody has free health care? Now, some people are saying yes, some people are saying no. So let me ask you a question, and this is a trick question, and you can nod, or I don't know if you're allowed to voice your opinion, but yeah, you can nod. Do you have constitutional rights? Now, this is a trick question. Does the Bill of Rights give you rights? Let me say that again. Does the Bill of Rights give you rights? And when I show this slide, you will know the answer. Do your rights come from government? No. What are the dangers if your rights come from government? They can take them away, legally, morally, and ethically. So let's go back to that. Do your rights come from the Constitution? No, you have no constitutional rights. The Bill of Rights doesn't give you rights. You have no constitutional rights. I don't mean that you never had them. I don't mean they were taken away from you. I mean you never had them. Why? Because the Constitution doesn't give you rights. You know what it does? It takes away rights from the government. It's a list of negative rights. It says government cannot do this, government cannot do this, Congress shall not do this, Congress shall not do that. It's a list of never guys. You never got your rights from the Constitution. What it did was explain what the government can't do to abridge or infringe on your rights. The government can't stop your free speech. The government can't stop you owning a gun. The government can't stop you from assembling. The government can't stop anything that has not been enumerated in the Constitution. It can only involve itself in those things that have been enumerated in the Constitution. So where do your rights come from? What does the Declaration of Independence say? It says, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their government. By themselves, can I give myself rights? I can't, because I have no authority over you. How about the majority? Can I go out and take a vote and have the masses vote to give me rights? That won't work too. You know why that doesn't work? Because if you say that the masses give people rights, that means the slaves never had rights before they actually got them. But the reality is the slaves always had rights, but they were unjustly being taken away from them. And it wasn't until the majority realized that the slaves had rights that their rights were reinstated. But they always had those rights. So you don't get it from the masses. Who's the only person that can tell this man that this lady is his equal? Not me. Who's the only one that can tell Hitler that the Jew is equal to him, that the slave is equal to the slave owner, and the slave owner should not have slaves? Who's the only person who can do that is the person who what? Has authority over all of them, who created all mankind. And this is the logical, rational thing. We hold these truths to be self-evident. You know the thing. That all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that amongst these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It's logical. That's why it's self-evident. It's logical. If you should think about it, you go, yeah. Okay, so what then is the purpose of government? Why do we have government? What's the next line in that Declaration of Independence? It says what? That to secure these rights, government are instituted amongst men. So governments are not there to give you rights, but to protect the rights that you already have. They're not there to do anything else, in fact. In fact, they do way more than they should. There are only two purposes. One, protect your rights that God gave you, or the Creator gave you, and two, enforce contracts. Go figure. Okay, now, but here we've been playing things. You know, I asked you earlier whether health care was a right, and some people in the audience might have said no, some people said yes. So I want to play a little game here, and as usual, there's a few trick questions. So what are rights? How do you know the difference between a right and what's not a right? So I have a little chart up there, and I'm going to flash something on the screen, right? And you tell me, again, whether you think it's a right or not. So again, warning, there are some trick questions here. Is this a right? Now, some of you guys are saying yes, but I'm sorry, that is not a right, that is a gun. But there is a right related to that, isn't there? What is the right related to it? You have the right to own a gun, but you're not entitled to be given a gun. You have to get your own gun. You have to pay for your own gun. You have to work for it. You have to manufacture yourself if you're into building guns or printing guns or whatever. But you have to get your own gun. You're not entitled to be given a free gun. So yeah, so is this a right? Yes, the right to bear arms. Okay. Now let's try this one. How about this? Freedom of speech. Is that a right? Some of you guys are like, he tricked us last time. No, it's a right. It really is a right. It is a right. You have the freedom of speech, okay? Now, let me ask you this, though. Is this a right? This is a printing press. For those kids under the age of 30, this is what we used to spread our opinions with before the internet came around, okay? So, but I need a printing press to exercise my freedom of speech. Am I entitled to a free printing press? No, how do I get my printing press? I got to go earn it, right? I got to buy it, I got to build it, I got to do whatever, but I am not entitled to a printing press. You see that? Okay, now you're getting the hang of this. Okay, so here's a list of things. Are these rights or something else? A home ownership, a job, healthcare, food, clothing, education. Now, trick question there. There is a right in there. Do you see it? It's home ownership. You have the right to own a home, but you have to buy your own home. You have to build your own home. You're not entitled to be given a home. Now you're going, okay, well, I'm getting the idea here, but I'm missing something. How do I tell the difference? So let me tell you the difference. And this is very important for the board, the county, because you're going to get into a question of whether something is a right or something is the something else. And remember, well, I'll explain that in a minute. So here's the difference. First, rights are things that the Creator gives you, right? The something else is what we call goods and services. Goods and services are the product of somebody's labor. If a right depends on somebody else's service, work, or money, it's not a right, it's a good or a service. For instance, is education a right? Only if you paid for it yourself. How about food? How about healthcare? Why? Because that education is dependent on somebody else providing the labor to give you that education. That healthcare is dependent on somebody providing that labor to give you the healthcare. So I always ask, so if that healthcare is a right, where are you going to get it from? Are you going to go out and capture a bunch of doctors and whip them until they provide healthcare? Where are you going to get the healthcare from? You go, well, no, we won't do that. Instead, we'll go out and we'll enslave 30% of everybody and use that money to give healthcare to people who can't afford it. But what are you doing when you enslave people, even 30% or 10% or 5%? You're taking away their free labor. See, you have the right to your own labor, but you don't have a right to anybody else's labor. You have the right to your own goods, but you don't have any right to anybody else's goods because that is stealing. As soon as something becomes a product of somebody else's work, it becomes a good and not a right, and you don't have right to that. So remember the difference. The right to bear arms is not a right to be given a free firearm. The right to an education is not the right to be given a free education. So whenever you're actually making a decision here, you should think, is this a right that the Creator gave them? Or am I going to enslave a bunch of people, take away their rights? I use the word enslavement loosely, but you understand. I'm going to take the product of their services and I'm going to forcibly give it to a group of other people. Here's the summary of that. Goods that are granted as rights require you to enslave men fiscally or physically to ensure a continuous supply of the goods that you've promised to others. Now, don't get me wrong. Taxes or fees for services that you require is fine. You own a car, you pay fees for using the road. You own a house, you pay fees for the sewage and the police protection and the fire protection, right? The heavier car you have, the more you beat up the roads, you pay more. The bigger house you have, the more services you do, you pay more, right? But those are fees for services. But today, most of the fees that we're paying aren't going for services. They're going for goods for other people. So when we fight for social justice, we have to be sure we're not fighting to take goods from one group of people to give to another group of people. By the way, whenever we do that, government steps in and takes a cut for themselves. I've done calculations and I found that government is about 6 times less efficient than charities. Right? And you can go look at the numbers. So, how do we solve this? How do we solve this as a loving community? How do we correct past atrocities like Emmett Till? Can we correct it by creating new atrocities? You can't oppress the children of oppressors and not be an oppressor. You can't be savage against the ancestors of savages and not be a savage. There are stories of clans in various ethnicities who waged wars against each other for centuries. One slight led to another, another to another. For instance, the Auca Indians had spent centuries fighting each other, killing each other. Aucas had a short lifespan because nobody died a natural death. They all died of injuries or disease due to infections and wars. There was no thought of reconciliation or forgiveness in that culture. Then one day, 5 men flew in on an airplane. Nate Saint and Jim Elliott, missionaries, showed up on a beach. They were bringing medicines and a message of salvation. But the Aucas murdered every single one of them, led by this man, Min Kai. Min Kai personally speared Nate Saint. But this was not the end of the story. A few years later, the wives of those missionaries, those murdered missionaries, went back into the Auca settlement. Since they were women, they were not seen as threats. They ministered to the Aucas, health and well-being. They reconciled to them. They forgave them. The cycle of violence and condemnation was halted. The Aucas became Christians, and Nate Saint's own son was baptized by the man who murdered his father. The cycle had been stopped. Forgiveness and reconciliation. Today, the Auca's Indian lifespan has doubled. They don't die at the hands of their fellow men, but by old age, because of the example of reconciliation of the wives of the murdered missionaries was taken to heart. Will we continue the legacy of retribution or the legacy of reconciliation? The Hutus and the Tutsis had a genocidal war. There was no real cultural difference between the two. How did Rwanda recover from those massacres? Not by retribution from one tribe to another, but by reconciling to them. There are so many stories. If you go back and look at that reconciliation story, they reconciled to each other, and they forgave their enemies. So how do you solve this? Through reconciliation and forgiveness. Nothing else will work. The solution to past atrocities has always been to justly punish those who committed those crimes, but then accept their repentance and move forward to forgive their offspring. Any attempts to punish the offsprings of those who do not commit atrocities always results in a continuation of hostilities. My friends, once the Civil Rights Act was passed, we should always be looking, and we should all have been looking, but once the Civil Rights Act was passed, we can locate genuine racism and deal with it. In fact, people have made lots of money when acts of racism have been committed against them. But we're not to hold the children or grandchildren of slave owners responsible for their ancestors' faults, especially since the Civil War effectively destroyed all the farms and wealth of the slave owners. I want to talk about the root cause of black plight. Because we still have black plight in black homes. We have plight in black homes at a far greater percentage than other communities. Why is this? Because there is a problem today. And that's why our organization is called Every Black Life Matters, and Kevin will wrap this up with talking about it. We still have black plight. See, before the civil rights laws, the problem the black community had was that the government was not protecting their rights. But past the Civil Rights Act, the problem we see with the black community is that government is interfering with their ability to develop independence. The real cause of black plight today is government. As Kevin mentioned, they're trying to dumb down the educational system. They're trying to create dependency. The government passed socialistic laws. And let me wrap up with this. If we care about both black and white and brown and all humans, we must seek solutions, real solutions. And here is how black plight became what it is today. The destruction of families by welfare and socialistic policies is easy to prove. First of all, welfare kicked the father out of the home by disincentivizing mothers to keep jobless fathers around when they would get much more money by kicking out the fathers. This is well documented by both liberal and non-liberals. The absence of fathers is one of the primary causes of lower literacy rates, gangs, drugs, violence, and homicides of black males. We have evidence on our black website if you want to look at it. And do note, a previous speaker said that black fathers are more active than any other community. But if you look at the research that she cites, that research actually says that is not true. In fact, I can give you the site that she used, the link that she used. Black fathers are not more active because they're not in the home. Not to mention that many of them are in jail, in prison, because of crime bills that were passed. The welfare state was targeted towards black communities. LBJ said he would make sure blacks vote Democrat for the next 2 decades by focusing on them to get them hard. So they were systematically targeted. Kevin talked about the targeting of abortion clinics at blacks. Did you know that there are 44 million blacks today in America? There would be 64 million if 20 million had not been killed in the womb, murdered before they even got out of the womb. How can you have equity when you aren't even allowed to start your life? It doesn't matter if you're pro-life or pro-choice. Are you pro-black life? Because every single black life matters. As a result of welfare and continual creep, blacks were slowly weaned, and I use that word carefully, into dependency. And then, of course, came the minimum wage laws. Like, what? Minimum wage laws? Did you know that prior to the in the 1930s, African-American men were surrounded by Jim Crow laws and racism. And they were willing to work for less money than white men because they couldn't get jobs. So guess what? Imagine that you're a racist white business owner, and an African-American is willing to work for you for half the price of a white man. Who are you going to hire? You're going to hire the person that makes you more money. So African-American communities were thriving. They were making money, and they were learning those skills, and they were bringing those skills back to the community, and they were developing economic ecosystem of their own community, and they were growing. And then a certain faction said, we can't let this happen. We have to pass a law that says you have to pay everybody a minimum wage. And the minimum wage just happened to be what white men were making. So now if you're a racist business owner, you don't like blacks anyway, so you're not going to hire them. You're going to hire the white man. And so those communities started going under, and that skill set went away, and people weren't learning, and it was hurt. And then, of course, there was attacks on that community. We've heard about those attacks, where targeted wealthy blacks were targeted by the KKK and destroyed. Today, minimum wage laws continue. In fact, it ensures that young black youth who can't get a good education, back in the 30s, the African-American literacy rate was 70%. Today, in some areas, it's 18%. I have all these things documented on our website. So minimum wage laws today ensure that those young black youth who may be able to learn a trade, but they can't earn enough to make the minimum wage, they only can, their skills are so bad, but if they were able to work for less money, they could grow in those skills and start their own businesses. But the minimum wage holds them back. As Thomas Sowell says, the minimum wage is effectively zero for black males because they're not getting hired. Vouchers, school choice. You know, if we could let black kids, 70% of all black parents want their kids to go to a good school. And they want vouchers so they can go to a school that's not infested with drugs and gangs in their community. They want to go outside. Or they want to start their own school. Churches want to start their own schools. Imagine if they had school choice. Look at the states that have school choice. African-American kids are doing so great. Then, of course, then Antifa and BLM come around, and what do they burn? They burn down black businesses and black communities. And of course, I want to talk about police brutality. It's important we talk about it. There are bad cops. But the problem is that many bad cops can't be fired. They stay in the system. It's almost as hard to fire a bad cop as it is to fire a bad teacher in New York. We've got to change those laws. My friends, all these things can be fixed. These are the things we should be fixing. not blaming other people for it. Do we love people enough to try and fix this? Why are we not addressing these issues? Why is the council and the board not saying these are the issues that we should be addressing? Not just for blacks, for any ethnicity. I ask you as friends and fellow human beings, show us how you can join hands and focus on the real problems. The black community has a problem. It's time we fixed it. What could be more welcoming than addressing the real issues and not creating new issues that cause strife? Because if you care about black life, you have to care about every single black life. Because every black life matters. Thank you very much.
So we want to thank you for just hearing us out. There are real problems. There are real solutions. If we're sincere about equity, inclusion, and diversity, the community should get the Equity, Inclusion, and Diversity Committee and the mayor of Wausau and have some conversations. Say, look, you may not have known this, but blacks are being mercilessly targeted by your favorite organization. They're being slaughtered at a disproportionate rate. If you want equity and inclusion, then let's talk about it. First thing, Miss Mayor of Wausau, publicly denounce and renounce Planned Parenthood and what they're doing to the black community. Equity, diversity team, renounce and denounce. So we can all be on equal footing. We can all say, hey, look, we're sincere about what we're doing here. This is not a political game. This is not theater. These people are being mercilessly targeted and we want to help. That's where you start. Level set everybody. Say, this is what we want to do. And, oh, by the way, instead of changing the curriculum and demeaning blacks, we want you guys to recant that. We want you guys, equity, diversity, inclusion team, to go ahead and say, you know, we're going to stand up for school choice programs for all communities, but this will help blacks and it'll help the black parents to at least have some choices, charter, parochial, whatever. These are real solutions that you can do. The people in this room can make that kind of a difference. You've been armed with some facts and some truth. Now, don't take our word for it. Go and do the research for what happened in the 18 and 1900s. As a matter of fact, what's interesting about what I said about all of those things, Homestead Act and all of this, D'Angelo, Kendi, and all of those people mention the atrocities of slavery, but they conveniently ignore that particular faction that did those atrocities. That faction is around today. How come nobody ever mentions it? Ever. They never lay it at the feet of the people in that mind frame, that organization, that entity. You probably know who it is, but they never mention it. How can we say that these people are sincere when you're mentioning that all whites did this? You're trying to lay it at the feet. Oh, and when somebody was tweeting, you know, he's an avowed racist. But so you're quick to do it without, but you can't mention the entity that actually perpetuated slavery, KKK, and all the other things that I mentioned? Why? Why can't you just be sincere with it? And renounce and denounce them as well, if you're sincere. We have some places to start. We want you to be empowered to the extent that you don't cave, that you don't say, get defensive and say, oh, okay, I'll just stop. No, stand flat-footed, hold them to their feet to the fire about actual atrocities that are happening within all communities in America, but are especially targeted towards the black community. And say, this is where I stand with the black community. I stand for every single black life in every phase of black life. Now, do you stand for that, Miss Mayor? Show me. Can we have those conversations with our people, our administrators and county supervisors and our mayor who's throwing us all under the bus? I think we can, and I think we should. I think we can have that conversation with the New York Times. Hey, New York Times, how come you conveniently ignore all this stuff that happened and you conveniently ignore these people that did this? How come you conveniently ignore, all this stuff that's happening with this black? Excuse me. Right? So this is about empowering us so we know how to have a conversation about these things that really matter. Every black life matters. We want to thank you again for having us here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Neil. And they have said that they would stay after the meeting, so if anybody has questions and they want to talk to them, they are willing to take questions after the meeting. So we'll move on to review and discuss Thursday's meeting agenda items. Item 9A, appointments. Land Information Council.
Appointing Ryan Weber to serve on the Land Information Council as the Public Safety Communications Member to complete a 2-year term to expire at the organizational county board meeting in April 2022.
Any questions?
Chairman, if I may.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I mean, I believe that everyone should have a voice. Everyone should be able to talk. But I think saying that our mayor is killing babies is just reckless. And I think as a board, we can't put everybody up on a platform. The people that were brought here tonight don't have any degrees in history, philosophy, psychology, social work, social or civil work. They have they've not presented anything in terms of their background. And the one thing that he said was that this is not how you build a community, this is how you destroy it. I sat here and listened as they peddled in conspiracy theories and national propaganda. This is not what our community is about. Our mayor went out there talking about love and a sense of unity and community. That is what we're talking about. What they talked about was labeling groups of people as baby killers, going through, they were divisive, false, insulting, inflammatory, and it lacked any factual basis. Mr. Query before this, he worked in IT before becoming a salesperson to find, I guess, a career in peddling these lies. Now, it's like I said, everyone deserves the ability to talk. We can have disagreements and be disagreeable, but not everyone deserves to have the county board acknowledge them and give them a platform.
Supervisor Harris.
I'll wrap up.
Supervisor Harris, stop, please. I have a request for a point of order.
I thought we were speaking about the appointment that we have moved on from the education presentation to talk about the next item. So why are we allowing this diatribe?
Because our mayor was a member of this body. She is an elected official mayor, and she deserves not to be disrespected. She deserves our respect, just like we respected them, and should not be called a baby killer. That was wrong, and I think our community is better than that. Again, if we're gonna move forward, we need to move forward with love, listening to each other, talking to each other, and stop demonizing each other. So let's move forward.
Supervisor Harris,
and
I'm
I
going
will
to have
stop.
to rule that you're out of order at this point, and move forward.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. We're on to the review and discussion of Tuesday's meeting agenda items.
Mr. Chair.
And
I agree with Supervisor Harris. Why are we letting our guests
you are out of
come
order.
into our meeting and talking about other local?
Excuse me. We are moving on to item number 9A, appointments. 9A, Land Information Council.
Discussion on the presentation? Is that possible?
We are moving on. At this point, I rule we're moving on to the review and discussion of Tuesday meeting agenda items. Item 9A1, Land Information Council. Any questions? Item 9A2, ADRC.
Appointing Dr. Kathy Meyer from Wood County and Tony Omernick from Marathon County to the Aging and Disability Resource Center Board of Central Wisconsin for indefinite terms.
Any discussion? Moving on to item 9A3, CCIT Citizen Membership.
The City County IT Commissioners are appointing Chet Strebe, CIO at North Central Technical College, as the citizen member of the City County IT Commission for a 2-year term beginning June 1st, 2021 and expiring May 31st, 2023.
Questions? Okay, under 9B, ordinances. 9B1, Town of McMillan rezone. Tim Vreeland on behalf of Rita Blinker. Ordinance 16-21. Item 9B2, Town of Green Valley. Jesse Richardson on behalf of Richard Miller. Questions? Under 9B3, Marathon County Health Department Licensing Program Ordinance, Ordinance 18-21. Resolutions under item C, 9C1, Health and Human Services Committee, item 9C1A, a resolution to endorse 2021 Wisconsin Senate Bill 239, Resolution 29-21. Supervisor Lowe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Could we get some background on the bill, please?
Do we have the Human Services Chair on the call? Supervisor Butke?
Yes, I am on. The link is on the attachment in our agenda for tonight. And it states how current law establishes a procedure for emergency detention of an individual who is mentally ill, drug dependent, or dependently disabled, or who demonstrates a substantial probability of physical harm to himself or herself or others, or impairment or injury to himself or herself due to impaired judgment or inability to satisfy certain basic needs due to mental illness. And we had both Michael Loy from the healthcare facility as well as corporate counsel speak to the subject at our Health and Human Services Committee meeting. They are both, Michael Loy is very much in support of it. It passed unanimously in our committee.
Any further discussion?
Mr. Chair.
Supervisor Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, and I did read through this, and, you know, with my background working with some pretty unstable folks, I can understand the impetus for it and the need for it, but I'm always a little reluctant on waiving time limits and the potential for abuse for that. You know, it's not that I don't support this. It's just that I think there are legitimate concerns which could be raised around who's making the determination on when the clock starts. Because indefinite detention because they're never reaching stability could be extremely problematic going forward. And that's just one concern I had reading through it. I trust our professionals. I don't think it'll be abused, but there would be an opportunity for some. And it's just a concern that I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor Krause.
Thank you, Chair. I had asked a lot of questions at the Health and Human Services Committee about this because I have a master's work in individual and family counseling. And what I had read from this was that the detention starts when that person is taken in by the police. The police appear, the police decide whether this person needs to be under surveillance because of harm to others or themselves. And this is in addition, there's a team, CART, which deals with people with mental illness and so on. But there also is drug abuse, drug addiction. There's also alcoholism that enters into this. And as it was explained to me after I asked all these different questions, was that there's many underlying factors to why this person is behaving that way. It's not always the most obvious, like they might be diabetic, they might, if they're alcoholic, they might have also a mental illness. So being under observation for more than 72 hours was considered to be a benefit to them because in many times 72 hours is not long enough for them to become stabilized because of their condition, and they are needed to be under observation longer before they're released into the community, especially if they might be cause a harm to others, as well as causing a harm to themselves if they are released. So that's why they wanted to extend it, make it more than a 72-hour detention time. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions?
Supervisor Bizzotto.
Supervisor Bizzotto, go ahead.
Chair Gibbs, I was wondering if you or the other committee head might be able to share whether there were any particular incidents in Marathon County that led this to be raised as a concern, or what was it that led to this initiative to have us endorse this measure?
I'd refer that question to the Chair of Human Services.
Okay. We did not get any specific incidents, obviously due to confidentiality, but clearly there is a need to sometimes extend the time period. But by the time the patient is brought down to the healthcare center, there is a lag in time to allow to analyze the person effectively. And the feeling is that the current law is just too short, and that's why there'd be the need to extend that.
Mr. Chair.
Corp Counsel, please.
Yeah.
I think I can offer some examples. As most of you know, my office we're the civil counsel for Marathon County. We prosecute involuntary commitment cases on behalf of Marathon County, and actually also on behalf of Lincoln County. These individuals can be taken to the healthcare center by law enforcement under Wisconsin statutes if it's determined by the law enforcement officer that there's probable cause to believe that they're suffering from a mental illness, a drug dependence, or developmental disability that renders them dangerous to themselves or others in an emergency capacity. The law provides that individuals must be afforded a hearing, cannot be held longer than 72 hours, not including weekends and holidays, and must be afforded a hearing prior to or within that 72-hour time period, or they are to be released. And I can tell you that there are many different kinds of circumstances that do arise in our experience. And The first case is that in order to be admitted to the healthcare center or other facilities around the state, there's often a requirement that they be medically cleared. And that's because definitely individuals who are encountering some kind of crisis may very well have had some kind of drug overdose or may have some kind of health issue that they would not be aware of at the healthcare center, and that's the reason for medical clearance. And sometimes that clearance takes quite a while in order to accomplish. These individuals are not necessarily very cooperative with the process, so it can take a number of hours to just get through the medical clearance process. Other definitely occasions that occur are an individual may have intentionally harmed themselves to the extent that they're going to require medical services in order to be stabilized, so that they can even be assessed for the existence of the mental illness or other disorder. And some people have really injured themselves very severely, and in order to allow that kind of treatment to occur, that's the reason for the extension. Other folks also, sometimes they haven't eaten, they haven't had enough fluids, so they need to be treated for malnutrition. They may also have other kinds of disorders that have gone untreated, as Supervisor Krause referenced, untreated diabetes, other issues, or they may have just simply other health issues that are going to require to be stabilized within that period of time, and they cannot be observed on the psychiatric unit until they get through those. So those are examples, certainly in my experience, where there are issues regarding the need for medical care within that 72-hour time period. It's my understanding that this Senate bill came to the attention of the folks at North Central Healthcare, and they are in favor of that because it gives their staff, their clinical staff, an opportunity to what they feel is do a proper assessment of the individuals that they're involved with. If I was asked to draft it, I would draft it somewhat differently. There's language in there that talks about being observable and stabilization and that kind of thing. So, if this passes and becomes law, we're going to be in court arguing over what observable means, what stabilization means. But it is, I believe, a step in the right direction. But Supervisor Johnson is very correct in that. And I guess he went into the other room, but he is correct that this is something that needs to be observed by certainly the community, because there is a potential when you waive time limits that it can go on indefinitely. But it's not a waiver. It is a period of time that would be exempted from the 72-hour clock. So when the person is ready to be released from the medical facility in Marathon County, that person then would be under the detention and could be transported to the healthcare center and assessed there. So I think that there are certainly safeguards in our community in these cases.
Okay, thank you. Any other follow-up questions by the board? Okay, moving on to Human Resources, Finance, and Property Committee. Under 9C 2A, approval of the 2021 budget transfers for Marathon County Department of Appropriations, Resolution 30-21. Any questions? Okay, item 9C 2B. Supervisor Robinson, excuse me, go ahead.
I was just going to comment on this item. This came out of both infrastructure and HR finance, and it deals with two things. One is in last year's capital improvement budget, we inserted a number of bridges in an effort to make sure that we had continuation of expenditure levels to maximize the general transportation aid and deal with some critical needs on those bridge repairs, deck repairs, those came in over budget. And then secondly, in light of the discussion on the federal level relative to infrastructure investments that may be made, Commissioner Griesbach wanted to advance the design work on several highways and interchanges to make them shovel ready, so that if there is funding from the federal government, that we're able to capitalize on those by having those shovel ready projects. So $225,000 is for the design, and the rest is for the overages on the bridge.
That is referring to item 9C2B, resolution amending the 2021 capital improvement budget funding for highway projects in the amount of $539,925, transfer from 2021 highway fund balance, resolution 31-21. Questions? Okay, moving on to item 9C2C, accept a donation of property at 1312 North 16th Avenue, Wausau, from Habitat for Humanity, and amending the 2021 budget to account for such donation. Resolution 32-21. Questions? Moving on to item 9C3, Human Resources, Finance, Property Committee, Environmental Resources Committee, and Forestry and Recreation Committee. Item 9C3A, County Land Exchange in the towns of Easton and Harrison, Resolution 33-21. Any discussion? Okay, item 9C3A. Oops, that was item 9C4. Board of Commissioners, City County Information Technology Commission. Item 9C4A, approving City County Information Technology Commission intergovernmental agreement and operating agreement, Resolution 34-21. Supervisor Johnson, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, am I correct in assuming that after reading through this, that this is just a continuation to facilitate the continuation of the joint services?
It is, but there is a modification.
Right.
Right.
Right. Thank you.
Correct. Any other discussion? Questions? Okay, moving on to item 9C5, Executive Committee and Diversity Affairs Commission. Item 9C5A, designating May 5th, 2021 as a day of awareness for missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls in Marathon County, Resolution 35-21. Any discussion?
Supervisor Bozotto.
Supervisor Bozotto, go ahead.
First of all, I would like to thank the Diversity Commission for putting these proposals forward. I think this is a great step in the right direction in terms of acknowledging the world of hurt that the Native American community goes through in particular. I did have a quick question about, I see that our next agenda item concerns the 5th of May as well as celebrating Cinco de Mayo. And I was wondering if there was a reason that May 5th was chosen as the Native American Missing and Women Day, and if there might be an alternative day that wouldn't conflict with May 5th, because that seems like a lot for May 5th to bear on its shoulders. So I would be in support of the resolution either way, but I just wanted to check in and see what the reasoning was behind that.
I would call on the Diversity Affairs Commission Chair, Supervisor Zhang.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The question, to answer the question, Supervisor Bensoto, is that the May 5th nationally is recognized as the day for of awareness for missing Native American Alaskan women and girls. So we wanted to be consistent with what is happening nationally and statewide. So that's how the date was chosen.
Thank you, Supervisor Zhang.
Any other discussion? Any other discussion? Okay, item 9C, 5B, resolution recognizing the historical significance of the Mexican holiday of Cinco de Mayo, May 5th, resolution 36-21. Any discussion? Okay. Item 10, announcements and/or requests. Supervisor Johnson.
I'm going to be asking for a little additional time since at this, I figured this would be the point of the meeting to make some comments regarding our presentation. So I'd ask your indulgence for a couple of minutes.
I'm going to confer with Corp Counsel, please.
Thank you.
Supervisor Johnson, I am going to, unless there's objection, I'm going to allow that and understand that, we will have decorum and we are not going to debate but because we are at the stage of announcements, and so clearly, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, excuse me, I make an objection to that, if I may state.
Go ahead.
At Katie Ham's presentation last August, we were instructed we could make no comment, ask no questions. As soon as she was done, you ended the meeting. In that same mindset, I think that it would be most appropriate that we have that same rule applied, that there be no comment, no question, no discussion about what that presentation was. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate the supervisor's objection. At this point, at the same token, the presenter in that presented did, in fact, identify individuals in the community, and people want to react to that. And so I will allow, again, we are not going to get into a debate. There is not going to be a discussion. But people wish to respond, and I am going to allow it. Vice Chair McEwen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have an objection from hearing from the supervisors, but the announcements were supposed to be kept to 30 seconds. And if we're going to, make exceptions, I think this is going to open up a door that we're going to have to continue to do that at other board meetings. Thank you.
Noted. Go ahead, Supervisor Johnson.
Thank you. There just seems to be so much misconception about the intent of this. And the way I see the intent and the way most of us that support this resolution see it, it's just meant to be welcoming. We're trying to attract people to this county. There is all these nefarious avenues that were explored, and bringing up authors that say this and ascribing those beliefs to us is just not accurate. I think we all want the same thing. I don't believe there's anybody in this county, white or black or Hispanic, that's responsible for what happened before, and nobody should feel guilty about it. But recognition of what occurred is not the same as what we heard tonight. We just want to move this county forward. We want to make it the healthiest, the safest, the most prosperous. And in order to do that, we need to attract young professionals. We need to be seen as a welcoming community. And this whole debate has given us a tremendous black eye, perhaps both of them. And things that were ascribed to us by the presenters tonight, they took tremendous liberty and overstepped where the good folks in this county are coming from. We don't want to go out there and kill people. We don't want to, I didn't know what the heck they were talking about, to be honest with you. This is about moving the county forward, attracting young people, and just last week, Neenah, Wisconsin lost 250 jobs because they couldn't attract a young, diverse workforce. They lost them to Chicago. Kimberly-Clark moved the jobs out of town. We don't want to be in that boat. We want to be seen as a welcoming, honest community, and I believe we are. And there's nothing wrong with saying, we are a welcoming community, please come here. As far as the attacks on our local elected official, that was abhorrent. And again, ascribing things to her that I know not to be true, that many people in this room know not to be true. And that is very unfortunate that happened. In fact, most of the evening, we need to understand that the gentlemen that presented are from a 501c4 corporation. They're political consultants. They specialize in clear, concise, and consistent messages. And they're very good at presenting that message, even if it wanders off topic and conflates the issue that we're trying to deal with all kinds of things that tug at an emotional chord. And they're very skilled at it. I just hope that at the end of the night, they will come back in and carry out the corpses of all the straw men that they so eloquently and skillfully beat the living crap out of. And that's all I got to say.
Supervisor Robinson. Supervisor Robinson, you're muted.
You'd think I'd learned by now. I just announced that the HR Finance and Property Committee is meeting on Tuesday, and the primary purpose will be an educational program on the American Rescue Plan, and begin the discussion about how we will be engaging the community in the public and how those dollars should be allocated consistent with the federal regulations. So if, I would encourage members to either to tune in and learn more about the $25 million that we'll have, and in the process we'll go about seeking input.
Okay, I have Supervisor Zhang, then Supervisor Krause, then Supervisor Dickinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll keep mine brief and short here. The Diversity Affairs Commission is meeting this upcoming Wednesday at 12:30. It would be in the Employee Resource Center room. We will be taking up a variety of issues, including the Community for All as well. Again, if you have any questions or if anybody's interested, please feel free to join us on that day. Thank you.
Okay, Supervisor Krause.
Thank you. This month is declared Mental Health Month, and a local organization named NAMI, it's also state and federal, has groups for families who have members who have mental illness. In Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we go from violence to abuse to hate to dislike to tolerance to understanding to acceptance to liking, friendship, compassion, and then love. And I'd also like to mention that President Carter has written several books, and he said most people, women who have abortions, are low-income women. I have worked in an abortion clinic for a short time, and it was in a low-income area, but it wasn't just blacks who had abortions. I don't believe that it was 90% blacks have abortions. Thank you.
Supervisor Dickinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I just want to make a couple notes, and I would ask that you give me more than the 30 seconds since it was given to another supervisor. But it would be pretty, thank you. First, the last presentation by Katie Ham, she stated specifically in her presentation she was not a historian. So this idea that someone has to be a kind of learned person on all of this and not speak intellectually on the matter is quite silly. We did not have any opportunity to debate anything that she said, and she said some very amazing things. I think everybody in the room could look to that, so I just want to point that out. It was also stated in January 21, talking about these resolutions and the Community for All, it was stated by the administrator in a meeting that the resolution is doing more than hate. That was his comment in that meeting. So when we talk about what the Community for All resolution is or isn't, the community resolution does go beyond this idea of being a welcoming community. There are two opportunities for compromises that were brought up. Both were rejected because of language in the resolution. And so I just want to point that out. But I am going to say this. Regardless of someone, and I'll read this just because I wrote it and it's easier to state it. Regardless of how someone votes on these resolutions, we should all trust they have a fair and legitimate reason for doing so, one that isn't rooted in racism or prejudice without any kind of evidence. They should not be castigated by anyone for that, in the room or out. In order to do the good work of the county, we all need to trust that each of us is trying to do what they feel is best and trust and respect each other's votes. Additionally, when people say a certain resolution vote hurts our community, I disagree. What really hurts the community is when those who do not get their way on that vote go out into the public and tell everyone that it will hurt their community and broadcast the actions of the board members who simply disagreed for lack of merit in the resolution. It is the reaction to the action that can become the much greater problem, and I think we see that with what happened last week. Mr. Chair, I believe the work of this board supports all of our residents. I trust all of the members of the county board that they're trying to do what is best. I believe our laws, policies, and ordinances apply equally to all residents. All people in this county of every race, creed, gender, religion, class, etc. should know that this board does support them and wants to provide them the opportunity they need to live peacefully and successfully. They should know that the rejection of any resolution does not change that in any way, regardless of what they might be told. Thank you.
Any other announcements and/or requests? Supervisor Harris.
Yes, Chairman. I have a couple of requests. One is that the board moving forward develop a policy regarding speakers. Katie Hahn did present her credentials, and she did not insult anyone personally or any elected officials when she gave her presentation. So I think we do need a policy on speakers moving forward. I would also like to request that we have an educational presentation regarding core values and have a discussion about that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other announcements and/or requests?
Supervisor Bizzotto.
Supervisor Bizzotto, go ahead.
I would just like some clarification, if possible, Chair Gibbs, on whether it's okay for board members to attend committee meetings, and how is the best way to go about doing that. I appeared at a committee meeting and caused some confusion last month, so I'm not sure that needs to be done now, but I heard Chair Zhang just invite board members to appear at the diversity committee meeting, and I just want to make sure that that's a procedurally okay thing to do, and if we do attend and wish to speak or participate, if we should do that during public comment, or if we would need to submit comments ahead of time, or I'm not sure how it would work. So I just want to convey my confusion and put it out there. So thank you.
Thank you. We'll provide clarity on as far as the practice, which has always been that any supervisor can attend any and all or that they wish to committee meetings. They are. It is requested that they contact the chair in advance so that if there happens to be a potential of a quorum of another committee, they can put on the agenda the appropriate notices. However, and it has always been, at least as I have chaired any committee, the request to get participation from county supervisors, even though they may not be a voting committee member, they are welcome to attend, and the chair can, at their leisure, call on them and participate in those discussions. But it is also highly recommended that you contact the chair of that committee prior, and minimum at least 24 hours prior to the meeting, because there has to be the ability that the chair to change the agenda. It's called the bad key notice, which requires a notice that there may be a quorum of multiple committees at a meeting, and however, they will not be taking official action of that secondary committee. So it has always been encouraged. Now, the one thing that the executive committee has done to allow additional participation, or at least additional access to committee, at least standing committees, as they have moved to have all standing committee meetings in the assembly room, and they are videotaped, and that supervisors now in that case can at least review all of the discussion that has taken place by the committee. Any other announcements and/or requests? Okay, we are down to number 11. What is your pleasure? Vice Chair McEwen with a motion and Supervisor Rosenberg with a second to adjourn. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion to adjourn signify by saying aye. 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 Opposed, same sign. We stand adjourned. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I've got